Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I woke up this morning and I was treated to this on my Instagram feed. Hmm. The guy can move. He seems very happy. And I saw this thing, and good morning, America. It's happening, y'all. And so I looked at the comments. I looked around, and I clued into what this was all about. Trump hadn't been seen since Tuesday. Um, there's, all over. There's been this social media frenzy, trending hashtags of "It's happening" and "Trump is dead." So the White House did respond to all this speculation about whether Donald Trump had passed away. And they said, no, he's fine. He's going out golfing today, um, and we do see pictures of him and apparently his grandkids out on the golf course. So Donald Trump has not passed away, but that does not change the fact that he does appear to be having health issues: the swollen ankles, the bruising on the back of the hand. All this is indicative, apparently, of congestive heart failure, and to my understanding, that's a serious issue, and there's not much coming back from that. There are treatments, but the treatments take their toll on the kidneys and so on. So, uh, what I thought I wanted to talk about today is not so much, is Trump alive or not, or what is his prognosis, but what will happen if Donald Trump were to pass away or to just become incapable of carrying on his duties as president of the United States. What would happen then? And primarily the question I'm asking is, would this administration carry on essentially acting as a regime, centralizing, consolidating power within the executive branch, particularly within the president? Or would, under somebody else's leadership, would the White House revert back to essentially running the United States government as a democracy that was mindful and respectful of the rule of law and of the Constitution? So that's what I'm going to be looking into today. Um, so the assumption is J.D. Vance would step in and become the acting president of the United States if Donald Trump were to no longer be able to carry on his duties in that regard. So I want to talk about two aspects of J.D. Vance, and quite frankly anyone else, Marco Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard, who might step in. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that I feel, and I think many people would agree with me, that Donald Trump is a singular individual in many regards. Um, Not so much with respect to any particular talent or ability or work ethic. Um, I would suggest, however, that Donald Trump is singular in terms of his self absorption, his self indulgence, his greed, his ambition, and his apparent lack of anything that might resemble a moral structure. And he was, in fact, identified for those traits, apparently, 40 years ago by the Russians. And he was essentially cultivated as an asset, a Russian asset, for 40 years. They played the old, oh, we're really impressed with you, sir. You're an amazing individual. We think we could have a mutually beneficial relationship. And it would seem that Russia engaged in a sophisticated, comprehensive plan to essentially to take over, if you will, the United States of America without firing a shot. They just had to find the right guy. The United States, after all, is a democracy. So if they could find the right guy and they could make that guy president, then they could essentially take over the United States from within. That appears to be what took place in this case. It would appear that Russia identified Donald Trump as having this dark tetrad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism, although I don't think that necessarily played into it. But nonetheless, it does seem to describe Donald Trump. Now, such an individual, were Russia to approach them and say, hey, how would you like to be the president of the United States of America? We could make that happen. We're good at it. We're good at manipulating elections. That's a core competency with the Russian government. Vladimir Putin has been the head of state for Russia for 2 decades. He wins every election. He seems to attain approximately 80% of the popular vote, notwithstanding the fact that he's not a popular man at all in Russia. So Russia engages in wholesale, unabashed, unapologetic election rigging. They're good at it. So I think somebody just kind of thought, well, hey, why be enemies with the United States? Why don't we just, instead of just rigging our own elections, how about we rig theirs and put a guy in who we can control? Some guy who would essentially trade his country for the presidency. That would take a special guy. And I think in Donald Trump, they found their man. So the issue now is there somebody else like Donald Trump within the current administration who could step in and take over? So what I would argue to you is I don't think J.D. Vance is like Donald Trump. Not in this regard, not in this dark tetrad personality structure. I don't think J.D. Vance has been anything other than a completely insufferable individual in his role as vice president of the United States. But I don't think that's who he is at his core. Let me show you something, and perhaps this speaks to why I feel this way. Here's a little clip.
Be a vice president who never forgets where he came from.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I'm definitely not going to vote for Trump.
My current plan is to vote either third party, or as I joke to my wife, I might write in my dog.
What Trump is just another opioid.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
There is definitely an element of Donald Trump support that has its basis in racism or xenophobia. And I agree with you on Trump. I don't think he actually cares about folks. I think that he's leading people in a very dark direction, and that's ultimately what worries me the most about Trump. Trump is a really bad candidate, and frankly, I think a really bad person. I officially accept your nomination to be Vice President of the United States of America.
So there you go. J.D. Vance saw Donald Trump for who he is, and he didn't like him. He was quite clear-eyed about Donald Trump. There are many more interviews on that topic. It's very clear to me that J.D. Vance is not fooled for one moment by Donald Trump. And I don't think he's like Donald Trump. Out of all the characters in this administration, I would think maybe Stephen Miller has that dark tetrad personality, but he's I don't believe is a potential candidate ever for many reasons that I will not get into. But here's the thing. I don't think J.D. Vance, even with Trump out of the picture, I don't think he would be free to be who he is. I don't think he would be free to be his authentic self. And here's why. I call it the suits problem, or more specifically, I call it the Mike Ross problem, but this is related to the show Suits, if you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, I'll just give you a very quick update here. Take a look.
You want this job so much. Why don't you just go to law school?
When I was in college, it was my dream to be a lawyer. I needed some money, and Trevor convinced me to memorize this math test and sell it. Turns out we sold it to the dean's daughter. I lost my scholarship. I got kicked out of school.
That's Harvey Specter.
I got knocked into a different life. And I have been wishing for a way back ever since.
Mike Ross is a genius. Photographic memory. Amazing.
Let me tell you
guy.
something.
This is Harvey
This
Specter.
isn't elementary school. This is
top of the
hard
law
work.
firm.
Long hours. High pressure. I need a grown goddamn man.
You give me this, and I will work as hard as it takes to school those Harvard douches and become the best lawyer you have ever seen.
I'm inclined to give you a shot, but what if I decide to go another way?
I'd say that's fair. And sometimes I like to hang out with people who aren't that bright, just to see how the other half lives.
Move over. I'm emailing the firm. I just found our next associate.
So that's the basis of that story, of that show, that this top-notch corporate lawyer decided to hire just a guy who had no law degree, never went to law school, and present him to everyone at the law firm, their clients, the board, everybody, as a lawyer. Someone who's gone to Harvard and passed the bar, and he's a certified, qualified lawyer. So that dark secret ended up destroying the firm, because obviously that's terribly illegal. And at first it was just Harvey Specter, that top-notch lawyer, who knew the secret. But then one by one, other members of the administration, of the board, and so on, the partners in the firm, came to know the secret, and they didn't turn on Harvey Specter or Mike Ross. They kept the secret a secret. So now they were complicit. So now they are co-conspirators in a criminal act. So What am I getting at? What is the Mike Ross of not just the Trump regime, but I think probably a large part of the Republican Party? Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Here is the Mike Ross. This is a graph of voting data from Pennsylvania. It says all counties, but it's just all the counties that had been analyzed by the Election Truth Alliance. That's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that just wants to ensure that elections in the United States of America are safe and secure, free and fair, and valid. They want to test the veracity of the voting data. If this looks funny to you, it's because it is. This is a clear fingerprint of ballot stuffing, or possibly ballot switching. You can more or less see at what point the ballots started getting stuffed or switched. In either case, it invariably happened electronically by way of the voting machines. While I'm on that topic, let me show you what a normal vote turnout percentage or vote share percentage would look like. It would look like this, essentially straight horizontal lines. Each candidate would essentially establish through various polling stations what their anticipated vote share would be, and that would just carry on as the vote count increased. In other words, we're talking about numerous polling stations. Some polling stations are small. They just maybe have 100 people that go vote there. Other stations have, like in this case here that we're looking at with San Mateo County from 2024, some of these polling stations have more than 2,500 votes in them. Now, according to the law of large numbers, as we see here, the more data you have, the closer that data will represent the overall population. It's called the law of large numbers. So the more data you collect, the more accurate the statistical inference is. But in either case, so you'll notice on the left-hand side, close to the y-axis, you'll see there's more variation in the data. And that's completely normal. With smaller statistical samples, you'll have more variation. If you measured the height of men, the average height of a man is 5'10". But if you just measured one guy over there, one guy over there, one guy over there, you might get a great variety of heights. If you measured a group of 3, 4, or 5 men, you still get a fair variety of heights. But if you measured 1,000 men, you're probably going to get an average of 5'10". 2,000, 3,000 men, 5'10", 5'10". That's how it works. Law of large numbers. The only reason why I go over that little lesson in statistics with you is so that you can appreciate how completely abnormal this is. And I could show you all night here various graphs that look like this from different counties throughout the United States of America from the 2024 election. Another way of looking at it is with this graph. This is looking at Ohio, the entire state of Ohio. So every line here is a different county in Ohio. And this is looking at the drop-off rate. It's also known as the down ballot difference. So what we should see here, if we were to focus on the top graph, what we should see here are all of these lines, whether they're red for the Republicans or blue for the Democrats, all of them should be above zero, and they should extend between 1% above zero and 3% above zero. That would be normal, because what this is looking at, ladies and gentlemen, what this is looking at is the difference between the number of votes received by the presidential candidate for a given political party and the number of votes received by the next individual down the ballot from that same party. Now, in this case, it was the candidate for Senate. So what this is saying here, if we look at these red lines that are above zero, they're positive. You'll see the tallest line almost touches 10%. It's almost 10% higher. So what that's saying is that Donald Trump received 10% more votes than the Republican senator received. So people voted for a Republican senator. And then they voted somehow 10% more for Donald Trump. If you look at it another way, they voted for Donald Trump, but then didn't bother to vote for a Republican senator. Now, just to explain why under normal circumstances, these lines would be 1 to 3% above, well, that's because some people just vote for the president. And this is well established. This is going back decades, generations. Some people will just vote for the president and hand in their ballot. But that's typically 1 to 3%. In this case, every single county we see in very few cases is it less than 5% more votes going to Donald Trump than went to the Republican senator. And in every single case, Kamala Harris received fewer votes than the Democratic Senate candidate. So somebody voted for the Democrat Senate candidate, but then didn't vote for Kamala Harris. I say somebody. Apparently, lots of people. Every single county had so many individuals who voted for the Democratic Senate candidate, but then didn't apparently vote for Kamala Harris, that we see this trend. In every single county, Kamala Harris getting fewer votes than the Senate candidate for her same party, when in normal circumstances, she would receive between 1 and 3% more votes. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a clear fingerprint of ballot switching. You can also see mirroring here, and I'm making another video to explain that. The mirroring is because some votes were taken from one candidate and given to another. The lines are not the same length, but the shape is similar. It mirrors. And the reason why that is simple math. If you take 10 votes from somebody who had 100 votes, then you're taking 10% of the votes away from them. If you give those same 10 votes to somebody who has 50 votes, you're increasing their vote share by 20%. Bear in mind that on the y-axis here, we're looking at percentages. So that's why the shape mirrors, but the actual lengths of the lines are not the same. That's the math behind that. In any case, this is very clear, wide-scale, aggressive, unabashed, unapologetic vote manipulation, election rigging. This has been perpetrated by individuals who are not concerned about being detected, because it is very, very clear. So the natural questions at this point to ask are, well, who did it? How did they do it? How did they evade detection? Why didn't somebody stop them and catch them and arrest them? These are all great questions, and I don't know the answer. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of theories. I have my theory. I won't get into that now. But the way I look at it, given how unequivocal the data is, essentially, this would be like looking at a house that has been burnt down. And naturally, you'd ask, goodness, how did this happen? How did this house burn down? Was it lightning? Was it an electrical fire? Did it start in the garage? How did this happen? Of course, you'd ask those questions and you'd investigate. But nobody's going to say, well, I don't know. I mean, let's maybe the house is burnt down, maybe it's not. We need to gather more information here. We got to know things like who did it, how did it happen. No, ladies and gentlemen, the house is burnt down. The house is burnt down, right? Just because you don't know how it burnt down doesn't mean it wasn't burnt down. When you look at data like this, data that should look like this, that's election rigging. There are no other explanations. That's election rigging. This is election rigging. We might not know how, and quite frankly, if you look at, call it an administration, I would call, the Trump administration a regime. There's nobody to look into this. Nobody's going to look into this. Nobody's going to investigate. Nobody's going to be charged. Right? To my mind, that's part of being a regime, where instead of serving the population, you serve yourself. You protect yourself. You entrench your own power. That's a regime. So the Republican Party has figured out a way to control the outcome of elections in the United States of America. I think that is very clear. I think that's what this data is telling us. And so, to my mind, this is the Mike Ross secret of the Republican Party. Plenty of people, hundreds of people would have had to have been involved in this to pull this off. So plenty of people, and especially the folks at the top, would be aware of this. If that 2024 election was not so aggressively, unapologetically, unabashedly manipulated by the Republican Party, if each presidential candidate received the same number of votes as the senator of their same party, this is essentially the distribution of votes that we would have seen. We would have seen Kamala Harris achieving a historic win. I don't believe any other presidential candidate has ever broken 60% of the popular vote. I think Ronald Reagan got 58.8%, and I believe that's the highest, even higher than FDR. She clearly was going to crack 60%. But that election was manipulated. So, to my mind, this is the secret that could very well keep J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard, keep them towing the dictatorial line, maintain course as a fascist regime. I don't think they would want to. I think they would just have to. Because in a free and democratic society where you adhered to and honored the rule of law and the Constitution, this kind of nonsense would land you in jail for a good long time. That would be treason. Right? To subvert the will of the American population in an election like this, that's treason as far as I understand. So how could they have anything other than loyalists to their regime in places of power, in the CIA, in the FBI, in the NSA? How could they do that? As soon as anyone could investigate anything, they would start arresting people. So nobody's going to investigate. And the only way you can't have people investigating is if you maintain this administration, if you will, if you maintain it as a regime. So regardless of what might happen with Donald Trump's health, regardless of what's going on there, I don't think we can count on seeing a change anytime soon. At least not from any of the actors involved in this particular administration. I think they're all implicated. I think they'd have to know what happened with the 2024 election. I think they'd have to know. And as such, they're all complicit and they're all guilty. So I don't think we'll see anytime soon a change to this regime, even if Donald Trump were to exit the scene and no longer serve as the president of the United States. I think you'd still see a dictatorship in place because I think they have no choice. I think they're just in too deep and they don't have a choice now. So let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like what I'm doing here, please consider subscribing. And I will see you in the next one.